Thank you to the Social Innovation Forum and the Stifler Foundation for this opportunity. I'd like you to consider this image. You're a police officer responding to a call for service because there have been multiple reports of youth behaving suspiciously in a parking lot. You rush over and you jump out of your car, and as you do, you see all the youth running. An angry adult comes up to you and says, "Do something about these kids." Now, if you're like me, or if you watch the news, you might be worried about what happens next. I'd like you to hold that thought for a minute as I tell you about Strategies for Youth. Strategies for Youth is a training and policy organization dedicated to system change for how police interact and encounter youth. What we're doing is working across the country, and I'd like to tell you about it today. But first, a little background. What brain science has told us about teens is that it takes a while for their brains to develop, until about age 25, and that explains why they're impulsive and immature. Somebody has some teenagers at home. We know trauma makes this worse, and we know exposure to toxic stress of poverty and violence increases tendencies of youth to overreact when challenged. We also know that kids don't know what they don't know. They don't know the legal consequences of their behavior, they don't know their rights, and sadly, in 2018, there are very few places for them to learn it. As the safety net is not what it used to be, and as more and more people seek assistance, they turn to police. And the problem with that is as police are called into more and more complicated situations, their training has not kept pace. In fact, of the 600 hours most police recruits receive in the academy, only 4 hours are focused on how to police youth. And this is a problem because police are the gatekeepers of the juvenile justice system. Now, youth who encounter police can go on one of two paths. On one path, police often will default to use of arrest even for very minor offenses. And so contempt of cop arrests for trespassing or fleeing or disorderly conduct will lead youth to being arrested and down a very precarious and costly path, costly for them, costly for their families, and costly for us as society. But when police recognize that not all bad behavior is criminal, a second path opens. And when we train police to consider that the behavior they're seeing and the language they use with youth and the timing involved in their response to youth is key, we can see tremendously better outcomes for youth. Now, I'd like you to go back to that parking lot for a second. Everybody's running, and running implies guilt, right? Or does it? What if you're a kid who's been told all their life, run from the police, they'll hurt you? Or what if you're a kid who, when you see your best friend running, you do what your best friend does, just 'cause? SFY understands these explosive dynamics firsthand, and here's how we put what we know into action. First, we equip police through our Policing the Teen Brain training. This training uses a train-the-trainer approach, bringing in psychologists to explain the best way to engage youth and assert authority effectively. We also educate youth through our Juvenile Justice Jeopardy game, which we offers through youth-serving community-based organizations. And this game teaches youth through a train-the-trainer approach with police officers and youth advocates leading the game, how to navigate interactions with law enforcement and other authority figures, and how to be aware of the legal consequences of their behavior. We also work with law enforcement agencies to help them create developmentally appropriate, trauma-informed, equitable policies and practices for their agencies and to support their officers. Finally, we work hard to reframe the dialogue that we hear nowadays, to propose there are solutions and there are ways of fixing this. And we conduct original research to look at the structural factors that continue to impede progress on police-youth encounters. And we work very hard to connect all these dots to strengthen the safety net for youth. And the results are police and youth feel safer, community well-being is enhanced, and there's more equitable treatment of youth in the juvenile justice system. Perspectives change thanks to our Policing the Teen Brain training. We hear officers say, it's like a light bulb went off in my head. And we often hear them say, I wish I'd had this at the academy. And for youth, we routinely hear, I'm going to lose the attitude with police. Or they'll tell us, I'm going to think about who I'm hanging out with now. Our officers, after our training, are applying what they've learned, and the impacts are phenomenal. I have Lieutenant Detective Gillespie here from the MBTA Transit Police, where we saw an 85% decline in youth arrests, and Superintendent and Deputy Superintendent Leonard DePietro from the Cambridge Police Department, where there was a 71% decline over 5 years with an 80% decline in runaways. And in Charlottesville, Virginia, we've seen similar declines without any harm to public safety. We also work with school resource officers, and in Omaha and Spokane, Washington, we have seen reductions in school-based arrests, which has helped decrease the school-to-prison pipeline. What we're doing is building systemic change with an idea that started in Boston and is now being used across the country to change how police engage with youth. Where we're frustrated and where we're challenged is building our capacity. We have been funded by states and localities that were able to bring us in, but unfortunately, the communities that need us the most can afford us the least. And demand for our services in Holyoke, in Brockton, is growing. We started Strategies for Youth in Boston in 2010. And since then, we have been able to go into 19 states and 250 communities. Today, we need more support to hire more police trainers, to hire more attorneys, to develop more Jeopardy games, and to create more policies. We need to invest in public awareness and advocacy. We're hoping by 2020 to be in 26 states and 400 communities. And keep this in mind, please. For what it costs a state like Massachusetts to incarcerate a youth for 1 year, we can train 400 officers and change and sometimes save countless lives. We need an investment of $2 million to achieve this goal. And I know you are here today because you care about equity. I know you're here today because you care about every kid's life. And I think most of you understand, if not all, how important the legitimacy of law enforcement agencies are when working with youth. For these reasons, we hope you will join us on this very important journey with Strategies for Youth. Thank you.